Salome is out, and she looks like a really interesting unit. She was always going to be pretty interesting. Having a copy ability, those are always really, really fun to work around. Let's take a look at her stats first. She is a warrior Ares. I actually don't know what units that applies to, but it doesn't really matter. She has pretty high base speed, and she's going to be built really, really fast. So this is good for her. Self-imprint HP, because she is going to be an HP scaler, and I guess you can team imprint for attack for anybody if you're doing like a cleave setup or something. So pretty much, yeah, she's going to be an opener. I was thinking maybe they would, you know, slap a cooldown on her so you have to run her warfare set. Nope, doesn't matter. You can just run her super, super fast and copy whatever you want. Speaking of copy, the way it works is you get skill null plus X return, and you are susceptible to stuff like Bunny Dominio. And then you clone a target hero that has any ally or enemy as long as you can target them. So you can't target units behind Boss Arunca, and you can't copy anyone in stealth. You clone the target's appearance and abilities. There are some questions about how cloning works, which we'll find out once the actual once she actually like comes out. When in the clone state, separate skill cooldowns are applied. I don't know what this means. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a bit. And then when your clone state ends, any unique effects you get are dispelled. So you can't copy Nodos, give yourself God of Battle, and then just, you know, get out. And then, on the topic of Nodos, the way Warfare Set works is Warfare Set applies at the start of battle. When you copy a unit, do you copy their skill cooldowns, like, with what they have? Because let's talk about Dark Corvus unit with an actual functional S3, since Nodos S3 is just a cleanse slash strip. If you copy Dark Corvus S3 and you don't copy his cooldowns, his S3 is just going to be on cooldown. So you're not going to be able to really use it. On the other hand, if you do copy their cooldowns, then of course his S3 would be available because he would have the warfare set, and then you could just copy him. And this has another implication where if you're running her with a unit faster than her, and then you like use your skills and then you try to copy them, if you do copy their skill cooldowns, then of course their stuff would be on cooldown. So that could be something that affects who you copy and whatnot. If you outspeed somebody or you get outsped, whatever. If you get outsped, you're probably dead, but that's just something we'll find out once the thing actually starts. For the clone, let's take a look at some of the actual effects when you clone them. So here, well, you can see the targeting there for a second. When you select it, you can't select the people behind Boss Arunca, right? She's going to pick Straze, and she procced his artifact, so you'll copy their artifact abilities. This will probably work really interesting with, I mean, Genesis Ross artifact, you'd get the souls. I'm not sure what other artifacts off the top of my head could have really interesting applications here, but copying their artifacts is going to be neat. I don't think stuff like Tag of Hells will work though, because that's start of battle. So you get the Straze S3, and then notably, she procced all of the effects from his exclusive equipment, because she got the extra turn. She also got the buff extension that comes from his EE. So she kept the 2-turn invincibility, and now she can S3. Her copy is gonna be it's gonna be something, because they're gonna have to always keep her in mind every single time they release any unit. One thing about her copy is though, like, even though you copied Straze S3, and this is a fast Straze, so it's fine. If you copy like a base speed unit, and you're not gonna help them get their turn or anything, she's just gonna be a unit that has a lot behind her, because you have to think about who you're using her with and who you're using her against. Let's take a look at her S3 now. Her S3, you inflict collapse, plus also death break, 100%, ignore, Efres, soulburn, 10 souls, and then you deal additional damage to the target. So, no strip on this. So, like, if they have immunity, you're not going to be able to inflict your debuffs. The Death Break into additional damage, we'll see what the actual scaling is, but Death Break does increase additional damage procs by quite a bit. And then Collapse itself is pretty solid damage. It's a little bit hard to judge it based off of this, just because of because you don't know what gear is on these units. But you can see her S3 is going to do like about 6,000 damage to this boss Runka. This boss Runka could be like 2,000 defense for all we know, but if you assume it's 3k, I think this is pretty solid damage. Remember, Collapse itself is already a decent chunk of damage. This would probably one-shot like super squishy units like Pavel or something. Not super insane, but her S2 is insane enough, I think. I think her S3 is pretty solid. And then let's take a look at her S1 real quick, which is really basic, but attacks the enemy with the spear and triggers a dual attack from the ally with the highest attack. That's it. No conditions on it, which I think is interesting, because the only other unit that does this is Archdemon Shadow. Absolutely no conditions. So that's cool. And then one thing I think is kind of cool about her, just overall, is she's pretty flexible. Like, you don't necessarily have to even copy turn 1. You could just S1 turn 1, I guess. I don't know if there's like any setups that would really benefit from this, but it is an option. You could S3 immediately, though, like I said, no strip, so you're going to be very, very weak to immunity buff. In terms of her actual usage, she's going to be pretty funny for Guild War Arena, right? There's going to be some funny setups. They actually very much let us down here with one of the showcase, the Lethe comp, because they go ahead and copy Bystander Hua Young, which is really, really boring. What if they copied Lethe instead? And then he just omen everybody again. Of course, notice is a problem, but that's not the thing. It would have been funnier if they copied Lethe. I think he would have AoE applied the omen again. Also, very interesting image of Bystander Hua Young with buffs on her. So yeah, I think there's going to be some really funny ways to like run team comps with her. She's a bit hard to evaluate just because of how much of her thing comes down to who you're using her with. Yeah. And then for RTA, she should be like a pretty solid first pick potentially. Or not first pick, but like just 1-2 pick in general in like the upper half. Because she could be anything. Like, she doesn't really skew your team comp in one way or another, I think. It's also like, it's really going to depend on who she's copying. For PvE, there's kind of two ways to look at it. I think the more important one is, what does she do on auto? Is she going to S2 first or S3 first? If she S2 first, you might have some pretty funny team comps, like one-shot setups or whatever, where you just drop a double nuke, and it could be kind of funny. If she does S3 first, then it's a little bit worse, I think, because she would, I mean, you want her to S2 first, I think, ideally, for PvE stuff. For manual setups, like Advent, I guess, you could just clone and do the damage, and it would be fine. Otherwise, her S3 does have Death Break on it, and her S1 has the unconditional attack thing, which we'll see how useful it ends up being. Her clone is probably going to be random. We'll see if it has a targeting thing for PvE on auto. S1 unconditional attack is actually a bit less useful than it seems, because Archdemon Shadow doesn't really get used anywhere, but Salome's kit outside of Archdemon Shadow is a little bit better, I think, though the clone potentially being RNG might not be great. We'll see exactly what she does. Good luck with your rolls.